Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to everybody who has joined us today for this webinar. I am Dr. Nicola Knight, obviously PSDI admin under my name on Zoom today. I am the PSDI coordinator for this infrastructure, and welcome to our webinar series. This is the first of our webinars, hopefully the first of many, and we will give some information about some of our later webinars at the end of this one. So now I'm going to pass you over to Dr. Juan Bicaregui, who is one of the PIs of PSDI, and he is going to introduce you to the infrastructure and give a bit of a talk before I take over and then talk about some of our current work. Over to you, Juan.
Thank you, Nicola, and thank you everyone for joining. Glad to see that you are interested in PSDI. So next slide. I think I'm going to start by giving you just an overall picture of the aims of PSDI, and I'll do that by giving one tiny example of the kind of thing we're hoping to do initially, and then generalize to sort of the bigger picture, and then tell us a little bit about what we've done so far in the previous phase of PSDI, and then hand over to Nicola for where we are now and where we're planning to go. So as you can see on the slide, we're talking about data infrastructure for physical sciences. That's what it says on the tin. But if you look at the what we'll provide there, the words in bold is that we're connecting existing data infrastructures. So we're not talking about building a great big new centralized data infrastructure where everyone in physical sciences puts their data and makes it available to the world. That would be an ambition even beyond the great ambition that we have. So we're talking about doing some of that where there isn't infrastructure that already exists, but mostly just trying to put a shop window across all the different things that do exist in physical sciences. So it'll be a platform for data collection, sharing, and integration and curation. It'll support analysis across the three different types of data. So it's very important, we're kind of stressing that we're doing experimental data, simulation data, and reference data, which are the sort of different sources of data that we hope to make available through PSDI. We're going to build it by putting together things that exist already, and hopefully move the whole of physical sciences on by doing that. So it's a very big, and do curation beyond the role of an individual research project, which is one of the perceived weaknesses in what we have now, because a lot of research is funded on grants. When the grant comes to an end, what happens to the data? So that's the grand vision. It's, next slide, I think filling a gap. And if you compare with other countries and other domains, I think we have a gap in the UK in the physical sciences. I won't go through all the items on this slide, but we have to look at other countries and say, yes, there are similar initiatives to PSDI, or maybe sort of parts of PSDI in other countries. There are similar initiatives in other domains, in life sciences, environmental sciences, social sciences, etc. So in a sense, there is something missing in physical sciences in the UK, in those two dimensions. Where we say physical sciences, that's a very broad phrase. We're really talking about chemistry and materials and things related to that. We're not talking about particle physics and astronomy and those kind of things. An important part is to make sure that whatever we do build links also to similar infrastructures in other fields, so that we can enable cross-disciplinary and multidisciplinary research as well. Next slide. So I'm going to begin with a little example, just focusing. I think it's easier to get the sort of fundamental ideas across by focusing on something narrow, and then we say, well, we want to do that to everything. So let's begin with this. We're looking at biomolecular simulations. One of the examples that we're working in the current phase is around biomolecular simulations. And these three boxes at the top, they could be applied to anything, right? So in simulations, we create a model, we do some computation on the using that model, and that gives us the trajectories of the molecules and the atoms that we're looking at in time and in three dimensions, and those are the outputs of the simulation. But those three boxes are at such a high level of abstraction, it could equally be an instrument creating some data which is then computed and then some other kind of result as an output from that. So it's basically data input, computation, and data output. But what happens specifically in simulations? Well, we run lots of simulations. We use the scientific know-how to extract, the scientific results from that data and publish a paper. And that's the kind of old way of doing things, but it misses two important perspectives. The first one is around reuse, repeating the experiments. So if somebody reads the paper, they don't have all the information necessary to repeat the experiment. This has been said many, many times in many, many fields. In theory, what you're taught maybe as an undergraduate or even in school is that, you write down the things necessary to repeat the experiment. That just isn't true in today's science, in physical science and most of the physical sciences. And the reason I'll come to in a moment is one of scale and complexity. And the other thing is, of course, that it's about credits. So you give a list of citations at the end of the paper, which is supposed to give credit to all the work that you're built on. But in fact, when you've got a complex structure of data that's being used, it is impossible to give that in a meaningful way as a list of citations in a back of a paper. So those are the two of the many drivers for trying to sort of manage the data in a more coherent way. So next slide. So here is an example of the data flows and therefore the provenance of the data in a single command in a biomolecular simulation. And the red box in the middle is the calculation that is being run. The blue box at the top left is a reference to the computer that's being used. The two green boxes on the top line are the input files, and the boxes across the bottom are the output files. So again, this is very general and would apply probably to every single calculation that could be run. But this is just one tiny single command. Interesting that this community do use command line interfaces. So this is one single command in the middle of a simulation. If you show the next slide, this is how those commands are put together into the creation of a model. Not yet doing any simulation. This is just creating the model that will then be used to do the simulations. And then once you've got that and you run some simulations, you get a network of things. Show the next slide, which is really rather complex. So this is created from a database of links like the ones I've just shown you, and it's a visualization of all the links in the database. It's the graph of the database. You can see it's an immensely complex array of dependencies. Somewhere in here are the outputs of the study, the actual sort of few lines of conclusions that will appear in the data. And somewhere in here are all the dependencies that take you back to all the inputs to the calculation. And also in here are all of the dead ends that were followed along the way, that were sort of aborted and then restarted from somewhere else. But what we're hoping to do is be able to keep, as it were, a log of all these interactions so that you can then do the post-processing to work out what the sources were, what the outputs were, what the data provenance is, and understand or have the opportunity to build tools on top of this that will then enable users to understand where things have come from. Next slide. So what are we trying to do here? Well, we're trying to get the data fairer. I suppose, I expect everyone's heard the acronym FAIR: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And in particular, what aspects of FAIR are we trying to do here? Well, we're trying to build the full data provenance for the model creation and the simulation. So that's the R in FAIR, that's the reuse or sort of validation of results. We're trying to find, store, access, share the data, the F and the A, findable and accessible in the FAIR. Trying to collect the various files, both input, output, and intermediary files, and integrate them where they're coming from lots of different small sources. So trying to build a collection that is more than the sum of its parts, as it were, by bringing things together and linking them where we can. Obviously, maintaining compatibility with all the other data initiatives that are out there. As I said, we're not building something from new. We're talking about linking things that already exist. Particularly focusing on linking the computational and the experimental data sources in the field. And worth saying that we're not really looking at the integration of the actual data here. That's a really complex thing, and there are plenty of other excellent projects out there, like the CCP and Biosim, that is doing exactly that. And then to give credit, this work is being done by my two colleagues, James Gebby and Jazz Callaghan. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, this field is one where the users are used to command line interaction, and they're very happy with that. And we're not going to put a lot of effort into trying to change that. So it's partly about being able to track things to almost invisibly create logs of all the dependencies between the different files that are being created during the research. And using GROMACS, which is the most commonly used software in the field, and AIDA, which is a tool, again, used in the field for capturing provenance, also used in other areas. What we can achieve here is with a simple install command, as in that third line there, you just simply say install this software, and then all you have to do to create all these logs in a database is just add that one extra underscore you can see in red on the last line over the command line that is already being used. So if you're not in the field, I suppose that's quite a scary command line. For the people who are there, it's actually like the day-to-day work and not a worrying thing at all. And the only thing, by adding that underscore, you use AIDA to log all the dependencies, all the activities that are done, so that can then be accessed later and processed to do whether it's reuse or citation or whatever. Okay, next slide, please. Here's just some of the pieces of software that are in use here. So again, picking up existing software, not writing as little new software as possible ourselves. On the left-hand side, you can see a little sort of way that PSDI is working. There's a PSDI platform. Here we have some virtual machines and some storage. Then there's the Pathfinder, as we call it, this case study prototype, putting various applications on top of that platform and linking through to tools that are outside the tools that are commonly used in this field. So next slide. If you want to look up more of this, here are where the things are. The source is all in GitHub, and everything is well documented so that it can be understood. So that's just one example of the kind of things we're trying to do in PSDI within one field. You go to the next slide. This is the bigger picture, and it is a very big picture indeed. So we divided up the physical sciences sort of by where the source of the data is, because we're talking about a data infrastructure. So in the first column here, we have the big national scale facilities, institutes and hubs. So we have the facilities here. I'm based at the Rutherford Appleton Lab, and we have the ISIS neutron source, the Diamond Synchrotron, and the Central Laser Facility here as big national facilities. And then we have other big national things like the Catalysis Hub, the Royce Institute. And that's obviously a very important source of data, these big things. Then in the second column, we have what used to be called the mid-range facilities, now called the National Research Facilities, medium-sized facilities, one of which I'll just pull out, which is PSDS, Physical Science Data Science Service, which is obviously, as you can see from the acronym, very similar to PSDI. It's the same team. So this team here and at Southampton have been running PSDS for a while. That gives UK academic users access to various licensed data. So those are reference data sets, and the merging of PSDS into PSDI is one of the reasons why we're kind of saying that we have three kinds of data: reference data as well as experimental and simulation. In the third column, we had all the computational initiatives, the community collaborative projects, or the CCPs, also supported from this department here at RAL, and lots of the high-end consortia doing various different fields of physical science with high-end computing. And then the fourth column is the basically the laboratories at the university departments that are doing things using departmental scale facilities, but creating vitally important data and needing very, very often to be able to merge that data with the bigger facilities that they're using as part of their research lifecycle. So obviously, collecting data, linking data across all of that is a huge task. It's going to be decades to undertake, right? This is not a 3-year project. This is the beginning of a program that is going to take some decades, I believe, to really cover everything, but we'll bite it off in pieces and deliver things that are useful as we go. Next slide. So this idea of incremental development, partly because we want to deliver benefits as we go, and partly because that's the nature of the funding life cycle that you get. So the story of PSDI began a bit over 2 years ago with a statement of need that we put together to EPSRC for this kind of large-scale infrastructure for PSDI. We had a small pilot phase funded that just lasted 5 months, where I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And now we've got in 2 tranches the sort of main development phase, main development resource for the first phase of the project, calling it phase 1B and 1C. And 30 months to build that. We're building the hub components and the platform, which will do the linking and support whatever extra infrastructure is needed in individual cases, and a number of pathfinders or case studies to try and give some practical applications at the start. And Nicola is going to talk about that in a moment. So that runs through till March 25. Beyond that, we move into a next phase where we will be an operational infrastructure, as well as building further pathfinders and further case studies on top of the platform and extending the platform. Next slide. So the pilot project, as I said, just lasted 5 months, and we did a lot of engagement, really. It was a lot of talking. We did 8 case studies, and I'll mention those in a moment, and an awful lot of engagement involving 30 different activities, 400 people involved, and 50 organizations. So it's a very wide and flat project, as it were, where we basically did a lot of requirements capture to see what the domain needed and what priorities there were. Next slide. One of the things we did was 8 case studies. Again, I won't go through this in detail, but just to say they covered a broad range of different areas of physical science and trying to capture the different types of research that are going on, some of them specifically in particular fields: catalysis, materials discovery, materials physics, spectroscopy, some of them more general, around sort of general techniques that will apply everywhere: data curation, electronic lab notebooks, preservation, etc. So next slide. From all that engagement that we did during the pilot, we wrote a report with the recommendations. I won't go into them here. There are 13 recommendations in 4 areas. I'll just mention the 4 different areas to show the kind of different aspects of the things we looked at. We looked at technical issues around how to connect existing infrastructures. We looked at technical things around how we can make data as useful as it possibly can be and as broadly useful. And then we looked at the more human side of things, about how we can bring in any cultural change or make sure that people can be as effective as they can be in doing their research. And similarly, around the technology, how we can share technology, connect existing technologies, to make sure that the technology, the burden of developing and maintaining technology is as low as possible. So next slide. If you do want to know more about what we achieved in the pilot, do have a look. You can find these things pretty easily on our website, which the link is there, and it's a pretty obvious URL anyway. So hopefully you won't have to note that down. So there's a final report, which is a relatively short summary of all the work with those 13 recommendations, and it's basically the blueprint for the future development. There's a report on each of the 8 case studies that we undertook, which were the sort of narrower and deeper investigations. There's also a very important acknowledgements page, which shows just the sheer breadth of the project that we undertook and the number of people involved. So I think that's all I wanted to say about how we got to where we are now. And I'm going to hand over to Nicola now, who's going to take us through what we're doing in the current phase and what we hope to do in the next phase.
Hi there. Thanks, Juan, for that very good introduction and a little insight into sort of what we're aiming to do and kind of how we got to where we are now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we're currently undertaking within PSDI in what we refer to as phase 1B. So in this current phase, we are continuing that stakeholder engagement that Juan mentioned in the pilot phase, sort of going around and talking to lots of different people from lots of organizations, getting people on board with the work that we are undertaking. And we are also beginning the development, or have begun the development of components for PSDI, one of which was the demonstration of Pathfinder 4 that Juan gave at the beginning of this talk. As Juan mentioned, our current phase began at the end of last year and is scheduled to run until spring 2025. And this is as 2 separate funded phases, but the development work is scheduled to run across both of these phases. So the activity in this phase is organised into 5 different work packages. So we have work package 1, which covers the project coordination and management, alongside the establishment of the governance and oversight mechanisms, which includes our advisory board. Then we have the activities in work package 2, which cover the communication with the wider community, events such as this webinar and the future webinar series, and training activities. And then in work package 3, we're actually undertaking the evaluation of the technology options and development of the technical platform. And this work package works really closely with the first round of Pathfinders that we have in work package 4. So these are the initial development activities for PSDI, focused around some key areas. And this kind of enabled us to do a sort of in tandem requirements gathering and prototype development across both the platform and the tools to operate it. And finally, in work package 5, we're exploring the candidates for future Pathfinders. So this builds heavily on the case studies that we carried out in the pilot, and as well as the engagement activities that we did and wider community engagement that we are undertaking. So across all of these work packages, the activities largely divide into 3 areas. So within the platform, we're undertaking several scoping activities. In particular, we're continuing this requirements analysis and capacity planning, both inside the Pathfinder projects, as I mentioned, and also across the wider physical sciences community. Obviously, it's a very complex landscape, and so the requirements captures quite a diverse selection of requirements. As part of the system design, we've also been undertaking the evaluation of technology components and beginning the system build. We currently have 5 active Pathfinders, which are focusing on some of the key areas within, some of these being domain-specific applications, and some of these are areas that are more cross-domain techniques. So Juan covered Pathfinder 4 with that detailed example at the beginning of this presentation, and I'm going to be providing a brief overview of the other 4 Pathfinders in a couple of slides' time. The remaining activities largely fit into the PSDI hub, which supports the operation of this infrastructure. So the PSDI platform, on this slide, you can see a high-level view of some of the components that go into the PSDI platform for our current sort of reference implementations. So I'm not going to go into this in detail, as it's not my particular specialty area of the project, and I'm sure a discussion on technologies could fill a whole talk by itself. It's potentially a topic for a future webinar. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, we are currently testing several components that could be integrated into the PSDI platform. The Pathfinders are participating in this component testing and also in the requirements gathering. And it's broadly based around the research data lifecycle and the priorities that exist in the different stages of this. So topics for this include data archiving, data sharing, data publishing, and data annotation, among others that will be tested in the future. So currently the actual integration of some components is beyond the scope of phase 1B, so our current work, but this integration is expected to be performed in phase 1C, so the work that we've got coming up until 2025. So the final the second section, I guess, the final one on the list on the slide before is the PSDI hub. So this is where the core activities and services are carried out that actually support the PSDI as our sort of day-to-day and the actual infrastructure that will support the core components. So in this current phase, most of the activities in the PSDI hub centre around the work packages 1 and 2. So this is where our project coordination, governance, management all come under this umbrella, alongside our internal and external communications, engagement and training activities. As the service develops further, there are going to be core components required to underpin the actual delivery of PSDI, and the operations of these components will also come under the central PSDI hub. So now I'm going to give a brief overview of the current Pathfinders. So first up, we have Pathfinder 1, which is exploring the experimental and simulation data within catalysis. So the original concept in this Pathfinder was to determine how easy it is to currently look for experimental data for reproducing experimental results, comparing the processing tools and designing additional tools that could then lower the barrier for processing and reproduction of this catalysis data. So this is quite broadly applicable. It's not limited just to this, but initially the target area is X-ray absorption spectroscopy data processing. And so in this case, publications of the Catalysis Hub were analysed, and they're looking to determine the software that is required for reproducing the results in these publications, what alternative software could be used to also reproduce the results, and what were the main barriers to effectively finding this data, reproducing the results, and then reusing this data in other experiments. So again, these are some of the sort of topics that we've covered on things. Obviously, the stuff around FAIR, so finding accessible, interoperable, reusable. You'll see this reoccur in lots of the aspects because it really underpins actually getting the data and reusing it. So this initial analysis has then led on to investigation into Galaxy workflows for processing and analysing this XAS data, and a proof of concept workflow for reproducing these published results has been produced and is currently being refined through testing within the community. So the second one in our Pathfinders is it's a cross-domain Pathfinder, and it's looking at process recording. So this doesn't only just consider the end sort of data, or potentially even some of the files and process that was going alongside, but it's looking at the whole story in terms of the records that go alongside the creation and analysis of any experiment, as the context in which this data was produced is exceptionally important. So this incorporates many aspects, including research into software tools and standards, as well as metadata and semantic enrichment to provide additional layers to this data record and enable more intelligent integration between different systems. So one of the things in the future, like it would be ideal, is we just have the ability to be able to seamlessly generate the relevant supplementary information to support any publication, as I'm sure any person who has had to manually do this in the past knows the pain of trying to create this record in a way that currently isn't actually particularly reusable anyway. So this Pathfinder is going to be producing several resources and tools to aid researchers in their process recording. So 2 tools that are currently being worked on include a collaboration on an ELM find service, which provides a comparison on available electronic lab notebook systems, and also a data conversion resource, which gathers information on possible data conversions and the tools required to carry them out. Alongside the paper and electronic recording that is carried out by the researcher, this Pathfinder is also considering other methods of interaction with the lab, such as hybrid devices, voice technology, and smart lab systems, which are becoming more prevalent. So up next, we have Pathfinder 3. So data collections are a critical component of research, and they really power the discovery and understanding in the scientific sort of research community. In Pathfinder 3, our colleagues are exploring and developing methods to build, store, manage, and access data collections across the whole breadth of the physical sciences. So this includes institutional data that might be deposited by numerous groups into a single repository, facilities data collected at the sort of, for example, at the beamlines, which is on a range of different types of samples, legacy data, whether this is extracted from sort of old paper sources or proprietary digital sources, and orphan data, as I mentioned earlier. Sometimes like a project or grant can produce some excellent data resources, maybe for a one-off sort of project, but once the end of that grant has reached the end of its lifetime, then that data sort of has nowhere to go. So this investigation is split into smaller use cases, and each of these ones focuses on documenting maybe a specific data type or an application across a wide range of data and tools. So most of these use cases are going to be producing best practice write-ups, with the aim that these will then be able to be applied to further data sets across the physical sciences. And last but no means least, within our current Pathfinders, we have Pathfinder 5. So this is exploring the infrastructure and workflows for supporting the generation and interrogation of machine-learned interatomic potentials in a reproducible manner. So a proof of concept system has been devised that would be installable centrally within PSDI, and with blueprints also provided to enable local user installation. So in these systems, users can interrogate, download, and deposit data via both an API and a web interface. And this system is intended to be integrated into machine learning workflows. So the ultimate aim with this is for the user to be able to access this sort of through a browser, through a GUI. They will be able to select the data that they want to run, the machine learning model that they want to use, and then be able to run this to generate the potential. And alongside this, in the background, the process will be automatically be entirely recorded to enable that full sort of provenance, show the entire workflow, and enable full reproducibility of the model that they have carried out. So that is a brief look at our active Pathfinders, but where are we going next? And let's look a little bit sort of into the future. So as we've talked a bit about, obviously PSDI has come around relatively recently, but it is not intended to be just this short-term project. It is a long-term vision, and as Juan said, it's going to take potentially decades of work to actually get fully established. And this is something that will continue to grow out into the wider community. So our driver is the connection of existing systems and then the generation and adoption of tools that can be utilized across all of these applications. And although the ultimate scope of PSDI is very large, in the shorter term, we're going to be focusing on a smaller number of applications to ensure that our resources are effectively utilized to build infrastructure that the researcher is actually going to want to use and that will be fit for purpose. So in our current workflow, the Pathfinders serve this purpose of prototyping the platform and also allowing us to refine the requirements for the platform. This is done a little bit sort of in tandem. So in phase 1C, we're going to actually begin to release the prototype services and components that are currently under development in our Pathfinders. And we're hoping to be able to bring on board a small number of additional Pathfinders that then will begin their own development activities, again, helping us to refine the requirements for the platform and continue development alongside of that. We want strong engagement with the researchers in these communities throughout this entire building phase, and we find that this is really enabled through these Pathfinder activities. In phase 2, so beyond 2025, these prototype services will be deployed as operational services as we begin scaling up both the adoption of these tools in other applications, as well as new development activities. Alongside all of these development and operations, we will also be continuing our work in training, engagement with the community, and outreach, both on a national and international level. As was shown sort of with our timelines, the funding for PSDI has not been long-term from the outset. And so in each short phase, we are continuing to build up this sort of evidence to show the value of PSDI and secure our further funding. So how can you keep sort of up to date with what we're doing? This is the first in a webinar series. So this webinar series is going to continue. The next webinar that sign up is just gone live for, is going to be on Thursday, the 27th of July at 2 p.m. And this is going to take a deeper look at some of our Pathfinder activities. So this event and any future webinars will be available on our website, so psdi.ac.uk/events, and there you'll be able to see our full events calendar when we publish any events. Obviously, there is also a lot more content that Juan mentioned on our website. This includes information on the current work that we're undertaking, our outputs and publications, and you can also see sort of the past reports from our pilot. Naturally, you can find us also on social media. Feel like a bit of the end of like a sort of a YouTube channel thing. So on Twitter, we are at PSDI_UK, also on LinkedIn, PSDI UK, and on our brand new YouTube channel, where this webinar, once we've finished the editing and other new videos, will be posted, is PSDI_UK. So yeah, go along, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can also join our JISC mailing list. The easiest way to do this is to visit our website, and in the footer there is a link that will take you directly to our JISC mail list, and that sort of concludes the information on sort of how you can find out more about what we're up to. We really encourage engagement from sort of the community, so you can also get in contact with any of the members of the team. Obviously, people who are leading a Pathfinder in your discipline or area that you want to find out some more about it, do get in contact with us. We'd love to hear from you, tell you a bit more about what we're doing in our work.
I guess we just have to say thank you for your attention. I hope that you're interested, and I hope that you will engage increasingly as we increase the scale of the thing we're doing. Do get in touch with myself or anyone else or through email or through one of the social media channels if you like.
I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for attending the webinar, and just to encourage people, yes, as Juan said, to get in contact, but also if you are part of a community where this is something that would be of interest to them, then please do sort of follow along with us in terms of when we put out communications and stuff, and help us to circulate our message much wider. Obviously trying to build up our sort of reach, especially with Twitter potentially usage going down, and sort of trying to get the message out to people. It really helps to have that passed on from people into the wider community. So we'd really appreciate engaging in that discussion back and forth. So getting input from you, but also having you enable us to send our message out wider so that we can benefit as many people as possible. Thank you all for joining us today.